The studio lights were soft but sharp enough to catch every flicker of expression, every shift in the eyes. A long, polished table sat at the center of the stage, framed by cameras that felt less like tools and more like watchful judges. Robert De Niro sat at one end, his arms folded tight, his body leaning back as if the chair belonged to him. His smirk was small but steady, the kind of look that told the room he was ready for whatever was coming. Across from him, Ibrahim Traoré adjusted his microphone with slow, measured movements, his face calm but unreadable. The air between them seemed heavier than the stage lights, carrying the weight of different worlds, different battles. The audience shifted in their seats, their quiet murmurs fading as the moderator's voice introduced the topic global justice, a phrase that sounded clean but hid a mess of truths no one liked to touch. De Niro's gaze stayed fixed on Ibrahim, his voice breaking the stillness with a question that carried more doubt than curiosity. "Do you even know how the world works?" he asked, his tone smooth but edged. Ibrahim didn't look away. He didn't rush. His reply came low, almost like he was speaking only to De Niro, though the whole room heard it. "I know what it does to those it works against." The words landed without force, yet the air seemed to shift, as if something unseen had just stepped into the space between them. De Niro's smirk faltered for the briefest second, so quick you might miss it if you weren't watching close. And as the camera tightened its frame on their faces, you could feel the sense that the real story was only just about to begin. That morning, before the cameras and the lights, Ibrahim had stepped into the hotel lobby with his small leather bag in hand, only to be left standing by the front desk while the receptionist smiled and hurried to help a man who had just walked in behind him. No apology, no eye contact, just the quiet erasure he had learned to recognize. At the media check-in, a handler spoke over him while he tried to answer a question, as if his voice was background noise to be managed. These small cuts didn't draw blood, but they built a weight he carried without letting it show. In his mind, these moments blurred with older ones, being turned away from a meeting years ago because his clothes looked too simple, warning a government official about corruption only to be laughed out of the room, watching people who could have acted simply look away. Across the table today sat Robert De Niro, who carried a different history, one built in front of cameras and behind velvet ropes. In his head, activism was something he had touched in speeches and charity galas, and he had convinced himself he'd seen the worst of it. To him, Ibrahim was another dreamer with fire in his words but no understanding of the real game. From the sidelines, a reporter leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "They'll never let him finish." Backstage, one of De Niro's aides had told him, "You can push him, he won't bite back." Ibrahim, alone in his thoughts, had already decided otherwise. "I don't need to bite. The truth burns enough." On stage, the talk moved forward without raised voices, but the air tightened. De Niro's relaxed posture began to change, his shoulders drew in, his arms loosened, his smirk grew thinner, his eyes narrowed not in anger, but in something closer to recognition that the man across from him wasn't here to play along, and that the game might not be his to win this time. The moderator's eyes shifted from Ibrahim to De Niro, then back again, as if weighing the risk of giving Ibrahim the floor. The murmurs from the audience grew louder, a low wave of voices pressing for his side. Finally, with a hesitant nod, the microphone slid toward Ibrahim. He didn't grab it. He simply rested his hands on the table, letting the silence draw the room in. The camera caught every detail of De Niro's face, the slight lift of his chin, the guarded eyes that scanned Ibrahim, as if bracing for attack. But Ibrahim didn't raise his voice or point fingers. His words came slow and measured, each one carrying the kind of weight that didn't need volume. He spoke of facts that couldn't be polished, moments that couldn't be staged, truths that weren't opinions to be debated. "Fame lets you speak," he said, his gaze steady. "Pain teaches you when to be silent." A ripple moved through the crowd, though he didn't pause to let it settle. "You know scripts," he continued, his tone still calm. "I've lived scenes no writer dares to touch." Then came the story, simple, unembellished. A child in his hometown, sick and crying, turned away at a clinic door because her skin wasn't the right shade. She died before the night ended. The room seemed to shrink around the sound of his words. De Niro's smirk was gone, replaced by a stillness that wasn't just listening, it was holding something heavy, something he couldn't set down. His eyes blinked more often now, his posture pulling inward, his hands no longer locked together but resting loosely, as if he'd forgotten to keep them strong. Around them, the crowd's energy shifted, the restless whispers replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to listen on its own. The lights dimmed as the panel wrapped up. Chairs scraped against the floor, and voices rose in scattered conversations. De Niro didn't move. He sat with his hands resting loosely on the table, eyes lowered, as Ibrahim stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked past. There was no smirk, no glare, no handshake, just a small polite nod from Ibrahim, the kind that carried neither victory nor spite. Backstage, De Niro found himself alone in the dressing room, the hum of the building fading into the quiet buzz of his phone. Messages poured in, some applauding him for finally listening, others accusing him of being late to the truth. He scrolled without replying, his thumb pausing on old photos from charity events. smiling beside leaders and crowds, speeches he once thought were change. Now the smiles felt hollow, like framed moments without the weight of what they were meant to stand for. A new notification appeared, a message from a young African filmmaker. Now you understand why we fight. He read it twice, the words heavy but strangely grounding. Days passed before he spoke again. When he did, it wasn't from a stage or red carpet, but from a quiet room. A short video posted online. No music, no editing, just Niro looking into the camera and repeating a single line. The truth burns enough. It spread quickly, shared and debated, clipped into sound bites, but the tone in his voice was what stayed with people. In the weeks that followed, the ripples were small but real, threads on social media dissecting the exchange, young activists drawing courage from it, and De Niro's public appearances shifting from polished speeches to sitting in the back. Listening. Somewhere far from him, Ibrahim stood before a new crowd, the sun low behind him, his voice steady, his dignity untouched, speaking not to be heard but to be remembered.